Thank you. What this hearing is about, I think, was best stated by Colonel Vindman's opening statement. The question before us is this: is it improper for the President of the United States to demand a foreign government investigate a United States citizen and political opponent? Very well stated. I just listened to Mr. Jordan, as you did as well, and I heard his criticisms of the process. Nothing really happened. A lot of people are out to get the president. I didn't hear an answer to the question as to whether it's proper for the President of the United States to demand a foreign government to investigate a U.S. citizen and political opponent. And to date, I haven't heard any one of my Republican colleagues address that question. Colonel Vindman and Ms. Williams, thank you. I want to ask some questions that go through the background. What's come out during this process is that we had two Ukraine policies. One was bipartisan and long-standing, and that was to assist Ukraine, which had freed itself from the domination of Russia, to fight corruption and to resist Russian aggression. Is that a fair statement, Colonel Vindman?
I think that's a fair characterization, Congressman.
And to give folks a reminder of the extent of corruption, by the way, a legacy of Putin's Russia, is it your understanding that when their prior president, Mr. Yanukovych, fled to Russia into the arms of Mr. Putin, he took with him $30 to $40 billion of that impoverished country?
Those, there are different estimates, but it's on that scale, yes.
Vast scale for a poor country. And is it your understanding that powerless but motivated Ukrainians rose up in protest to this incredible graft and theft and abuse by their president?
That is correct.
And that was in the Maidan, it was called the Maidan Revolution, the Revolution of Dignity, correct?
Correct.
And young people went into that square in downtown Kyiv and demonstrated for months, correct?
Correct. And 100 died.
106 young people died and older people died, correct? That was between February 18, 2014 and February 22. Is that correct?
Correct.
106 died, including people who were shot by snipers, kids. And Yanukovych had put snipers on the rooftops of buildings to shoot into that square and kill, murder, slaughter those young people. Is that your understanding?
That is correct.
In our bipartisan support, and by the way, I want to say to my Republican colleagues, a lot of leadership to have this bipartisan support came from your side. Thank you. But our whole commitment was to get rid of corruption and to stop that Russian aggression. Is that correct?
That amounts to some of the key pillars.
That's right. And the Giuliani, Sondland, and it appears Trump policy was not about that. It was about investigations into a political opponent. Correct? I'll take that question back. We know it. And you know, I'll say this to President Trump. You want to investigate Joe Biden, you want to investigate Hunter Biden, go at it. Do it. Do it hard. Do it dirty. Do it the way you do it. Just don't do it by asking a foreign leader to help you in your campaign. That's your job. It's not his. My goal in these hearings is two things. One is to get an answer to Colonel Vindman's question. And the second, coming out of this, is for us as a Congress to return to the Ukraine policy that Nancy Pelosi and Kevin McCarthy both support. It's not investigations. It's the restoration of democracy in Ukraine and the resistance of Russian aggression. I yield back.
Mr. Welch.
Thank you. Just following up on Mr. Jordan, the easiest way to avoid investigation is to not do anything wrong. I want to talk a little bit about why we're here. Official government actions can't be traded for help in a political campaign. Let me give an analogy and ask each of you if you agree. Could a mayor of a city withhold funding for the police department budget unless the police chief agreed to open up an investigation on a political rival? Mr. Morrison?
In that hypothetical, no, I don't think he should do that.
Yeah. And Ambassador Volker, sure you agree?
Yes.
And the same would be true if it were a governor withholding the budget request of the state police unless the state police agreed to conduct an investigation on a political rival. You would agree?
Correct.
Yes, sir.
In your view, is it any different for a member of Congress? Of course not, right? Would you agree that the president has the same obligation as the mayor, as the governor, as the member of Congress to not withhold aid unless he gets an investigation into a political rival? Mr. Morrison?
Yes, sir, I would agree with that hypothetical.
I would agree.
Thanks. And we're having a debate here, both sides, as to how to read what's plainly before us, the presidential phone call where the president ignored the work of the advisors in the National Security Council of talking points and instead chose to talk about the Bidens and talk about Hunter Biden and ask for an investigation. So we are just going to have to debate that. But isn't the principle that no person, including the president, is above the law absolutely essential and worth the effort to make certain that we continue to guarantee? Ambassador Morrison?
Sir, I haven't been promoted.
I'm sorry, Ambassador Volker? I'm sorry, pardon me.
Yes.
Yeah, and Mr. Morrison?
Sir, the rule of law is essential to our democracy.
It's so true. You know, we've had some discussions and challenge from the other side that the president has authority in foreign policy to do what he likes. And in fact, he does. You know, a recent president by President Trump to take our troops out of Syria and allow the Turkish forces to go in literally meant that some Kurdish families went to bed Saturday night and woke up Sunday morning, packed their kids and fled for their lives. A lot of people, including both sides of the aisle, totally disagreed with that. But the president has the authority to do it, impulsive as that decision may have been, unwise as it may have been, as threatening to our national security. We're not talking about that here. And Ambassador Volker, I've listened to your testimony and I take it and thank you for making efforts to try to advance what had been a bipartisan Ukraine policy. Help Ukraine get rid of corruption, help resist Russian aggression. But what you came to learn painfully is that there was a sidebar Ukraine policy with Giuliani as the advocate, and it appears Ambassador Sondland is very much involved. Is that correct?
I don't know everything about that, sir.
You don't, but as you have been involved in, with the benefit of hindsight, while you were working on what you thought was stopping aggression and ending and eliminating corruption, there was a side deal here to get investigations going, correct?
Yeah. So, yes, sir, my objective was purely focused on support for Ukraine,
All right, so
national security, and I now have learned through other testimony about the president's statement about investigating Biden and other conversations that I did not know about.
Right, and thank you for that, and thank you for your candor about Vice President Biden's integrity and service. But the bottom line here is at the end of the day, we're going to have to make a judgment about what the president was up to with respect to that request for the favor and how it repudiated the policy that was the bipartisan effort in Ukraine and raises questions about in that hypothetical example I gave of the mayor, held himself to be above the law. I yield back.
Mr. Welch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador, I'm impressed with your career. Been very successful in business. I'm impressed with your commitment to public service. And I was very impressed with your forthright statement, so thank you for that. You said it was the highest honor for you to have this opportunity to have this appointment to serve as ambassador to the EU, correct?
Correct.
And you quickly became very involved in the Ukraine policy. And that policy has been described by you and others, was really very clear. Help Ukraine fight internal corruption and resist external aggression, correct?
Correct.
And this Congress, I think with the support of everybody up here, Republicans and Democrats, and in fact with a significant amount of Republican leadership, authorized the release of military aid, right?
Right.
And you and others who were working with you believed it was very important to the new government, President Zelensky, to have that White House meeting to show our support and send a signal to Russia, correct?
That's correct.
And from hearing you and from hearing our other witnesses, Ambassador Yovanovitch, Ambassador Volker, Ambassador Taylor, there was a concerted team effort on your part to get that meeting and release that aid, correct?
Well, there was always a concerted effort on my part to get the meeting. That was my singular narrow focus, was to get the meeting.
Right, and that was shared by all of the colleagues I just mentioned, correct?
Yes.
All right, and incredibly urgent, Ambassador Taylor described going to the front where Ukrainians were dying at the Donbass. 14,000 had died, and it was an existential issue for them that they get the aid. And you were well aware of that and shared, I'm sure, Ambassador Taylor's concern. Is that correct?
I did.
Right. And in your forthright testimony, you've testified, and it's really with the benefit of hindsight because you couldn't piece it all together. You know, Giuliani knew in real time what you were trying to figure out as you went along. Is that a fair statement?
I think so.
One, you testified that you acted on the orders of the president. That was you acting on his orders, correct?
Correct.
And you said quite explicitly there was a quid pro quo.
Relating to the meeting and the Burisma DNC.
That's exactly right. No meeting unless there's an investigation, right?
That's what we were told by Mr. Giuliani.
All right. And Mr. Giuliani, you absolutely...
Wait, no meeting unless there was an announcement of investigation.
Okay, thank you. And I asked, by the way, did the efforts of Mr. Giuliani authorized by the president impede the efforts that you and others were making to try to advance what you thought was the Ukraine policy?
Not initially. We were just working toward...
Ultimately?
Well, ultimately nothing happened.
Right. And Giuliani was the one who was absolutely insistent on the meeting, correct?
Giuliani was insistent on the investigation. Yeah.
All right. Now, I asked this of Ambassador Taylor or Ambassador Volker. If the mayor of Portland said to the police chief, I'm not going to authorize your budget unless you agree to do an investigation into my political opponent, would that be wrong?
Of course.
And likewise, if it were the governor of the state of Oregon doing the same thing, correct?
Correct.
And would that same rule apply to the President of the United States?
To investigate a political opponent? Yes.
That's correct.
Yes.
All right, so that's the question here. The President, in his phone call, he asked President Zelensky, who desperately needed the release of that aid, who desperately needed the White House meeting, to do an investigation, and it was focused on the Bidens and Hunter Biden in Burisma, in CrowdStrike. I mean, you don't have to answer that. The President's words speak for themselves. Do you feel, as a person who went into public service to serve, who had a team of people that shared your desire to help Ukraine, do you feel in any way betrayed by the double dealing of the President? It's a real question.
I don't want to characterize,
You don't have to characterize him. I'm just, you know, we all, if we get a chance to do something useful, we like to do it. And there's no better joy than when you're doing it with other people. And then
Mr.
when-
Welch, let me answer your question this way. I would have preferred that, and I'm sure everyone would have preferred, that the president simply met with Mr. Zelensky right away. Our assessment of Mr. Zelensky was that he and the president would get on famously. He was smart, he was funny, he was charming, he was the kind of person the president would like, and once the two of them got together, we thought the chemistry would take over and good things would happen between the U.S. and Ukraine relationship. That's why we were pushing for a quick, unconditional meeting.
So it's unfortunate that he was
That it didn't
unwilling to
happen.
meet without the commitment on the investigation. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you.